All right. Hi, everybody. It's 2:01. This is Kathy Powers, Chief Liaison with Frakture. We're going to get started with our presentation here now. So hopefully everybody can see our screen just fine. Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to go through our quick agenda here and get into the presentation. And I'm going to kick it over already to Michael Servino, co-founder of Beacon Fire and technology strategist for change.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. This is Michael Servino, and I am the Chief of Client Development here with Frakture, working with Chris and Kathy and our team on product development and for data integration and data management. And today we're going to be talking about the path to a data-informed communication and engagement strategy. So just to give you an overview of what we plan on doing, I'll go into that in just a moment. I did want to share with you that throughout the presentation, we absolutely want for folks to ask questions, and you can do that using the questions area. So feel free to post any questions or observations that you have, and we'll be monitoring those and feeding those into the presentation. This is really for you, and we encourage your contributions. So we'll start off around this question of why is data important for communications and engagement, regardless of what that engagement looks like in getting people to take more action or become volunteers or as part of a recruitment process for fundraising. Data can inform how we communicate and motivate people to make the decision to do the thing we want them to do. And we'll present a bit of a model of data and what types of data are important and how. And in the context of how consumers think about making decisions. I think we have a very strong bias in this presentation and in our business strategy around marketing that consumer-driven marketing is crucial, that understanding what people believe and think and what their motivations are and tailoring our messaging and our outreach to that will be more higher impact than a generic message or a product-based message to move people. So understanding where people are and how we engage them is critical. And in light of that, then data is very important. And there's a lot of barriers to how we get data, use data, integrate data within the nonprofit environment. And Chris will spend a little bit of time painting the picture of just how challenging this is and how much more challenging it's going to become. And in light of that challenge, we're going to talk through what we tongue-in-cheek call our fourfold path to data nirvana. And it's a construct for understanding the steps and maturity levels, if you will, of an organization as you move to using data better in your environment, for your messaging, for your engagement. And we will, at the very end, spend just a brief amount of time on bots, which are the heart and soul of what we do here at Frakture as part of the overall data strategy. But we intend for today truly to be an educational and engaging session. And with that, we will move right into it. So the first and foremost important thing that drives marketers is understanding, who people are and where we can reach them. And in the increasing clutter on social media and email and direct mail and even canvassing door to door, standing out, getting your messaging to pop, and thereby reaching people in a way that catches their attention, that moves them, can increase your revenue, can increase actions. I think those fundamental drivers are behind what every marketer should be thinking about in the preparation and execution of their campaigns. And another factor is how do I, in this competitive environment and when costs for marketing are going up, how do I reduce the cost of my outreach or control the costs and improve the impact? And data is a big part of that. Achieving increased revenues and actions and managing costs and getting the best ROI we can, return on investment we can out of what we're doing in marketing truly demands that we have a knowledge of our audience. And unpacking that is not just knowing, it's females age 45 or it's men with this particular demographic or we want millennials or that it's understanding our audience helps us understand what mediums we reach them best through. Are they single channel, only by email or only by mail? Is it a multi-channel strategy that will work with them? Even more important is around this question of what offer do we put in front of them? How much do we ask for in a fundraising pitch? Is this the right time to ask someone to volunteer boots on the ground, or is this a better time based on where they are and their commitment level of asking them to do some light action online? And the medium and the offer are a part and parcel of a much deeper premise about what moves people. And that is your organization's value proposition. And in the most classic marketing sense, a value proposition is the way that you position your organization and the offer through the channel you're going to send it in a way that meets a deep need of an individual, that touches on their beliefs or that satisfies a driver they have or satisfies a gap in their experience, fulfilling a need they have. If you can step into that moment with a compelling offer, then you are most likely to move someone to action. So that value proposition is really focused on reaching someone around what they believe, what they feel, what they value, and where they are in their decision cycle. And data helps us understand where someone is at the sort of core of who they are in their beliefs. And it's really a consumer decision-making model that drives that marketing. And that consumer decision cycle is about knowing what that person thinks or believes. And if I know that and I can persuade them with the right argument or put in front of them that emotional push or tell the story in just the right way that lets them know it's not only important they do this, but it meets a need they have and they will feel fulfilled if they do it, we are then able to move people from the basic place of take this action because we're a good organization to you are moving someone from being unaware that this issue is important to them being aware that there's something they should do about conservation. There's something they should do about poverty. There's something that they want to be doing in their lives to make a bigger impact. And that in considering what they should do, you are on their radar. And ultimately, the offer you put with the value proposition speaking to their beliefs will get them to make that decision to give, to donate, to volunteer, to take action. That this basic path of decision is a framework for understanding how our marketing fits in. And so the question becomes, how does data help that? I'm going to just take a moment and present a model for different types of data and how they help inform this strategy of communicating with people around what they believe and where they are in their lives about making choice. On the left-hand side, you can see that the scale of things that are objective that we know about someone, they're male, they're tall, and that are generally their general class, meaning that someone is a man or a woman, that someone is of a certain income level or a certain ethnicity. There are things one can infer about that individual based on the general characteristics of that class. Much of what's being done in data overlays and consumer geoclustering or lifestyle preferencing is helping us understand the general class that someone fits in, and by the fact they fit into that class, they have certain characteristics. Moving from those objective data points, one can get more psychologically driven data, that someone is of a certain personality type, or they have a lifestyle of consuming high-end restaurants, or they partake of kind of blue-collar worker lifestyle. That also helps us inform what their attitudes and beliefs might be at a general class level. So the idea here is that we can get data points on individuals from many different sources, and through that, understand where they might fit in a certain category. And that general information is useful in targeting and has been very proven. With technology and with the engagement of people in the digital sphere, there's more we can know specifically about individuals that helps even further segment and target. Of course, there's behavior, that they donate, that they attend events, that they've submitted an application, that they've referred a friend to the organization. Much of what's happening on social media about sharing and engaging or people commenting tells us that these are people whose behaviors show they are interested in our issue. These are critically important, and knowing that data about someone can help us more strategically segment those who are of a general class and are engaging with us in our content and therefore more likely to move and make a decision than someone who's just in a general gender class or characteristic that we don't have data on. So being able to bring data in from social, from email, from other categories helps inform the level of specific engagement someone has with us. And what I consider the holy grail, although grail with a small g, because it is very achievable, is behavior-specific attitudinal information about an individual. And that is, responses to survey opinion, understanding that someone does agree with us on our issue or does believe it is the most important thing in their life that they engage in a certain type of activity. Someone's belief about whether global warming is true or not true can help inform and target. Changes in life stage, where we know that specifically about someone, is a prime opportunity, particularly around social marketing or social change marketing, knowing that someone is engaged in a behavior change or has subscribed to a new gym, may be an opportunity to identify this as a health-conscious consumer who may be open to our messaging on pesticides in food, for example. So understanding someone's specific stage of life that's true for them, the belief that's true for them, that individual, helps us target even more than knowing that someone belongs to a general class who, as a general category of these 10,000 people, they think in this general way. So the notion here is the more specific we can get about behavior and the more specific we can get about attitudes, the better we're going to be at positioning our value to that individual about how we're going to help them solve a need or fulfill a belief they have about how they should be living their life. And in doing so, then it really gets us to the question of, why we can't do this well now. This data exists. We have, definitely response data on people of how they've engaged with our messaging. We have some data that we can append and overlay. And part of the challenge is, as marketers, we're facing an ever-increasing number of channels that we're trying to communicate through, and more of these channels where people are responding, and categorizing that data, making sense of it, is a huge challenge. Lots of technologies, lots of data points, not necessarily enough time to be able to make sense of it. Another big obstacle is around data integration and analytics are challenging, expensive, and the skill sets available in staff and in new hires, in data analysts and engineers are rare, challenging to find, difficult to hire for, and terribly hard to retain. One of the data points that's really important to understand as you look forward in your planning over the next 3 or 4 years is that data engineers, data analysts, programmers will be in short supply and very high demand. We're looking at almost 200,000 employable positions that need to be filled with not enough people to fill them. So adding more bodies may not be the answer because those people may not be available. There has to be a better way. And even if we have that data, empowering the staff, your communications team, who may not know the technical or the software engineering, but understanding, how do I read this data? How do I understand who my segments are that are most likely to respond to an action versus those that are most likely to respond to a donation ask, or those who are most ready to say yes to a volunteer opportunity or finish delivering certain information that we need for them to be part of a program. Knowing how to target that is partly a scientific, technical issue, but even more so is those people who are good at messaging and good at understanding the marketing side of things, making sure they have the ability to target, to push the messaging to the right audience and do it in the right channel. So do these kinds of things sound familiar to you? Said at the water cooler or in meetings. Our database of record can't possibly do that, or can it do that? Those single databases and where your database of record may or may not be able to contain all of the information that you want or that's useful to target your marketing. More and more organizations are finding discrete systems for discrete pieces of user engagement for, say, peer-to-peer fundraising, or for volunteer management, or door-to-door canvassing, specific apps that really make a difference in the efficiency and effectiveness of those systems, for which the data generated from those systems can't get into the single database of record. This is a new problem and a new challenge as new technologies are coming on the market. The other big one we hear is, it's going to cost how much to integrate this data? That as I said, the supply of engineers is tight, and the solutions to engineering have been pretty much the same for the last 23 years I've been in marketing. That the ability to get data integrated into the systems we need has been a barrier. Hiring more people, maybe that's the solution for some things, or possibly you can't find the right person for the position. And the one we hear the most is that wishful, I wish I could target my marketing. I wish I could better target my email. I wish I could target the segment of people who, believe the least about our issue, so I could share different information from them than folks who are already kind of in the choir. That's a big one, is that, we're speaking to the choir. We want to be speaking to people who are outside of our regular bounds and bring them into the fold. How do we target those folks? How do we find them? How do we identify them? Where do we get the data, and how do we manage that data is the big challenge we've got to improve on the targeting. I want to take a pause here and just see if there are, from the audience, other questions that are coming up that you're challenged by in your marketing. I think one is, how the one that I'm seeing here is kind of this. What's the difference between sort of psychographic data and other data? It's a good question, and the psychographic data is essentially data about a group of individuals that is an indicator for what their beliefs are and what they may be thinking, and it's a general categorization. So a good example. Axiom, for example, is a supplier of this, where they will profile your file psychographically to tell you, who are your blue-collar workers versus your retired gray hairs versus your urban elites. And those are indicators of a type of person with a certain spending level, a certain attitude, purchasing, subscribing to magazines, that give you a psychographic profile or paint a persona or a general picture of what that group of people look like to help you target your messaging. So with the data that's available to us, or potentially available to us, a big challenge then is, how do we get this cost effectively? How do we weave this into our programming and into our marketing in order to target and get better impact out of it? And I'm going to pass the microphone over to Chris to kind of talk through this fourfold path to data nirvana, how to use data much more effectively.
Great, thanks, Michael. So now that Michael's kind of gone through a lot of the different possible things that are important to both consumers and your staff and your team members around the world. We're going to talk through a path that we've found with the clients that we're working with and a number of other organizations can help navigate us out of kind of the morass around data that we all kind of find ourselves in. So first off, one of the biggest things you guys should realize, the amount of data you probably already have inside of your collective ecosystem, whether it be through your different social media channels or databases of record or fundraising databases, or even outside in your chapters or your affiliates, is extremely large. Enough so that there's a lot of demographic information in there. There's also a large amount of psychographic information, behavioral data, and that one of the key points is to realize that stage 0 is recognizing that it's important. Stage 1 is really recognizing that you can start thinking about tying these different systems and technologies and your data points together into effectively an ecosystem of data. And understanding that that ecosystem of data is critical to the next steps becomes a huge step one in stage 1 in kind of our fourfold process. This is realizing that there might be information in your Twitter or Facebook users that needs to be available into your donation system, into your fundraising systems, and you need to be able to get that data there. It doesn't have to be all the data, but it needs to be enough to recognize when some of your biggest and best activists online are also maybe your best donors or your best donor recruiters, or are some of your best organizers in the states or the countries that they're working in. And knowing this you have to know this by integrating individuals, donation histories, social media presence, everything else. So stage 1 is really what we call kind of an integration stage, so that you can get a better perspective across all the different channels you communicate with what's happening. Now, our stage 2, we call basically a warehouse piece or warehousing. And warehousing is the idea that you need a place to put the data. Now, this can be either in-house with your own staff, managed under your own databases. It can be outsourced to an agency. It can be hosted in a number of different places. But the idea is that if you're going to start doing some reporting and further targeting, you do need to find some location to host and store this particular data. We call warehouses a beast because they can be huge, they can be, sometimes ornery. Most importantly, though, they need to be fed, right? That if you're going to deploy a large database containing a lot of this demographic, psychographic information, you have to continually populate it, preferably nightly, with data coming in from all your different channels. So when you're dealing with the warehouse, you need to think about both the install and the maintenance of the warehouse itself, as well as feeding in data into it. Historically, this has typically been done maybe by an overworked in-house staff. As Michael pointed out, though, frequently the amount of staff people have that is devoted to routing and manipulating and warehousing data is very, very limited. So a lot of what we focus on at Frakture is how do we get you that warehouse, how do we populate it, how do we feed it so that people have the data in one spot that they can take further action on. So warehousing data is kind of our stage 2 from data nirvana. So stage 1, remember, is tying your data sets together. Stage 2 is having a place, a database where they can all live. Typically, this is not a database of record. So typically, a database of record is very focused on the specific needs, either fundraising needs or long-term stability needs for the organization. Typically, a warehouse-style system is useful for both integration and reporting and is kind of optimized around that particular set of data. So presumably after you've got and deployed a warehouse beast and you're actively feeding it with data, at that point you can start seeing results. So before you get to the useful bits, you have to accomplish these 2 stages. What we call the third stage is where you're starting to get out some useful information out of your warehouse, right? So this is the reporting. So the reporting aspect, this is where you can start defining and asking intelligent questions about your audience. So these are things like what are the key performance indicators for our organization? Is it growing and driving revenue? Is it taking action, increasing the number of activists that we're working with? Is it increasing the visibility of your cause or your mission or your organization? Is it getting the word out there about what you're doing? Once you have a good warehousing solution in place that you can start asking these questions, you can then start defining, and perhaps have already defined, key performance indicators and understanding what's happening there. We focus a lot with the groups that we're working with on cross-channel engagement statistics, and this is seeing how people are performing across different channels. Up till today, most organizations do a pretty good job of reporting on any given channel. They'll actually, or any given medium. They'll know how their email is doing. They'll actually know how some of their social media is doing, whether it's improving or not improving. We've seen, though, that especially when you're doing some psychographic targeting and messaging and improvement on your performance, doing cross-channel is becoming much, much more important. So a lot of what we do is help groups figure out some of the cross-channel impressions. How are eyeballs being mapped across social media? How are they being mapped across email and all the other different mediums of communication? This is also important when it comes to return on investment. So we've found that a lot of the groups we work with don't do a good job of comparing the amount of money they spend in a particular channel, in a given channel, and the basically the revenue they're getting back from it, or the actions they're getting back from it. This is typically happening also in online media, so a lot of online ad work, social media, etc. There's not a lot of good return on investment reporting. As you continue to do your daily channel updates, one of the other things we do a lot of focusing on is how retention is working across your organization, fundraising retention, etc. How long to break even. For example, if you go out and do a list append, if you go out and do a number of other different ways to acquire names or bring people into your fold, how long does it take for that to break even on the effort and the time and perhaps money you spent on that? And also the overall lifetime value. These are all the types of statistics that are critical to the long-term success of an organization, but we've found that a lot of groups have a difficult time managing that, particularly as the number and the volume of communication channels have increased. So once you have good reporting, once you've got a good sense of what's happening in your channels, your next stage, kind of the final stage 4 of our nirvana, is actually then empowering your team to use that information. So there's a number of ways to empower your team to then follow up with that reporting. Some of the ways we focus on is making sure that you're defining strategic segments across all your channels. So if you know that, for example, donors is a huge portion of what you do, you need to know your donors on Facebook. You need to know your donors on social media, on Twitter. You need to know your donors in your email program, your direct mail program, and be able to track those across all those different channels. That's a key strategic segment, and that the growth or decline of that segment is very closely mapped to your success as an organization. For other organizations, understanding, perhaps creating target segments of likely members or people who are likely to join, or alumni groups is a very common segment as well, where you might want to reach out to your alumni segment for advice, for hints, for fundraising, for events. So for organizations that are around the world or around the country, creating targeted alumni segments across all channels is a huge component of organizing. So you might say, for example, create a Eastern Europe targeted segment of all the alumni of your organization, because they happen to have a lot of contacts there. And for any future members who are in Eastern Europe, you then have an amazing body to help and support those groups. So empowering your team by creating these strategic segments is an extremely useful way to take action based on the data that you have, probably the most useful way. Otherwise, just empowering your team with information about what's effective and what's not becomes very, very valuable. So if you determine through your reporting stage that certain messaging works better than other messaging, you can empower and inform your team with that data so that they can send out messaging around those particular topics in a much better way. So those are the main stages that we look to empowering organizations to take action based on their data. We have one bonus one, which we call kind of our stage 4 bonus round. If you've done a good job through the first 4 stages of integrating your data, warehousing it so you have some sense across through different channels and communication technologies where people are living, where data is living, where information is. If you then are able to get good reporting on it and tie it together and push data back into it, you basically unlock the ability to experiment and innovate with new technologies in a way you previously were blocked from doing. So some of our organizations, for example, realize that once you have a good ecosystem in place, a good data ecosystem in place, you can start plugging in a new technology. For example, a new payment processor like a Stripe, or a new advocacy technology, or perhaps even a new petition tool or a mobile system, or various different technologies that might be recent, something like a Vine or some other means of communication, or something you've been wanting to use for years. Right now, we would know a lot of organizations that feel stuck using new technologies because they're concerned with how it's going to play with their existing data world. They're worried that their engineers are going to have to, route data to it using, weeks of coding time. They're worried it may or may not work. But if you do a good job in stage 1 of integration and stage 2 of warehousing, you basically get this bonus for free of being able to experiment and innovate with radical new technologies and see how effective they are without dragging your organization and your key goals down with it. So that's kind of one of our what we call the bonus to kind of one of the end roles of this is empowering your staff to be able to be more effective and allowing them to experiment and innovate in new ways they never were before. So one of the ways that we as Frakture help in these different stages. Frakture, we deploy technology, an army of what we call bots that basically help at all these different stages that essentially work by routing data in and amongst warehouses you might already have, plugging in with all the technologies that you already have in place, moving data in and amongst that information, hopefully helping you solve any challenges you're facing in stage 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 during this process. So that's what we have realized is our core competency at Frakture is not just helping guide people in the direction they're going, but also helping them solve any the technical challenges that they might face along the way, whether it be connecting your digital CRM with your email system, with your social media, pulling data into and out of that, whether it be helping set up a warehouse or populating an existing warehouse you might already have in-house so your team doesn't have to worry about that, or routing that data through reporting, either your own reporting suites or our internal reporting, and even empowering people by constructing and maintaining strategic segments across all your different channels. So that's kind of our role at Frakture is we realize that we live in this kind of gap between systems, moving data in amongst to help people get to that kind of stage 4 nirvana of this. So so the end result is that we hope that the end result out of this is that you can expand your effective team into a team of 5, from a team of 5 into effective team of 50 by using and leveraging technology to help you reach those goals, help you reach a state where data is no longer holding you up, but it's actually informing and enhancing your organizing and your engagement. There's also a huge amount there's also a huge amount of time savings that with the groups we've worked in. So their staff do not spend their time logging into systems, exporting data, working with Excel, where it's 2015 and people are still working with Excel to try and munge around data. So time savings is a huge aspect of this. The last one we realize is that if you are able to hit nirvana, you can close the loop between your data that's coming into your system from all these different channels and push it back out to empower all your organizers and your staff to be more effective at the work that they're doing. So I think we have a couple of questions that we're fielding now. Let's see, we've got yep. Okay, so we're going to unmute everybody right now for hopefully what is not a we can't. It turns out we can't unmute you guys. But if there are some other questions, we're happy to field questions either on the questions front or via chat. So I'm going to turn it back over now to Michael, who looks like there's a couple other questions that he's been looking at. So
Great. So one question was asked is around how to know what type of data you ought to be collecting or pulling into your systems for analysis and for targeting. And the sort of key way to answer that is by starting with at what stage or level of maturity would you judge your marketing program to be? If you are at sort of what I'll call level one, that is usually represented by a marketing program that generally treats everyone as the same group. Your creative treatments and your offers are very limited in terms of how many variations of a message that you send out and the specific targeting that you might do. So you might have, two segments in a mailing, people who donated in the past and not donated, or you're segmenting your messaging by people who took action in the past or didn't take action. It's traditionally, that level one is kind of a binary. They're either part of one group or a second group. Maybe you're doing three. In that case, what you're looking for there is more along the lines of the general and behavior specific. So knowing and segmenting a little bit by gender or ethnicity, if that's an important way to split for your messaging, positioning your messaging. And definitely introducing more things along recency and frequency and how many messages have people responded to begin to segment more discreetly. That's level one. If you're at level two, where you have a pretty robust segmentation that you're doing based on the time since they last engaged, the type of engagement they did, the level of engagement, then that's where introducing some of the beliefs, if you can get it, people's opinions or responses to surveys, in order to specifically position your message to that person's key drivers. So they might be a high dollar donor, that they've given recently, and they care most about X versus another group that cares most about Y. There you can version your messaging based on that belief, and you are able to then create more refined segments. Right. And then the last level is really where you have that robust level of segmentation, and what you're looking to do is then get into individual communications based on a person's specific beliefs or specific actions with you. And typically that starts in the high dollar program and then moves its way down through the chain.
Michael, there was a question about reporting and some of the specifics about the reporting itself. If you want to cover, so maybe you could talk a little bit about the kind of how we structure some of the reporting and some of the stuff you guys are seeing on the screen right now about what we found to be important across the reporting front.
Sure. That's great, Chris. And maybe if you could pull up and display, we've got some sample reports. So essentially, what we're showing here, just to give you a sense of the types of data that's available and ways to interpret it. This is an example of an engagement report, and the question that it's intended to answer is, given all of the messaging across all of my channels, I'm talking on Facebook, I'm emailing people, I'm on Twitter, how far is my message reaching? How many people am I reaching with my messaging? That's the impressions. How many eyeballs are seeing my brand and seeing my message? The next piece is interactions, which is how many people are clicking, sharing, liking, retweeting, taking some kind of an action on the content that I'm sharing to reshare it or to comment on it. So how engaging is my content? That's what interactions tell us. Actions then are the next step of how many people are converting to non-money engagement. They're filling out a form. They are signing a petition. they are signing up for email or answering a survey. That answers the question of how well am I motivating people to take a non-money engagement with me, which is can be a first step or a follow-up step towards a financial commitment. And then measuring revenue. How many people are donating and how much are they giving? How many people are buying t-shirts and swag from us? How many tickets are we selling for events? That final revenue, that money in the door, allows us to look then at each channel individually about how well those impressions and interactions are generating. We can begin looking at how is conversion happening across the different channels. Where do multiple channels together make a bigger impact on conversion? So we use this type of report to bring together all of the individual pieces, particularly around a campaign that might be multi-channel. A second example of a kind of report to consider is where you are doing paid advertising. What's the productivity of my marketing dollars? In this particular example, we're looking at comparing how my retargeting campaign is doing against my Facebook and email and Google at a very top level. And you can drill it down to specific campaign messages, specific ad creatives, and understand how many impressions per dollar am I generating? How much revenue per dollar that I'm spending am I generating on email versus Google ads? And should I be adjusting the balance of my spend based on what I'm seeing? What we've found is that for many of the organizations that we're talking to, that they handle some of the advertising internally. Maybe they're doing Facebook ads or they're doing some Google ad buying internally, and then they have agency that they're using for larger paid spends or more complicated paid spends. And it's incredibly complex for them to look head to head across the channels and their creatives. How are my dollars producing? By essentially using bots, we can dig into those advertising platforms, pull the data out, and be able to show side by side in ways that organizations haven't been able to see before. And then the last one, just to give you a model of what to look at, is an acquisition source report. Whether you're acquiring people as advocates or you're trying to acquire people as volunteers, or in this particular case as donors, then we're looking at we paid for people to come in January and February and March and April, and we can see that our list is growing. That's a good metric to understand. Are we growing? Are we shrinking? And an even better is understanding what our return on investment looks like and how are people converting in month 1, 2, 3, and 4 from when we acquired them. It's essentially what's called a cohort analysis that based on how long someone has been on file, what's the return on value that we're seeing, and monitoring people from different channels, different months, or different advertising campaigns or different platforms, we can begin to see that, hey, the people that we're acquiring on, say, Care2 are overperforming the people that we're bringing on Facebook. Maybe there's a different messaging welcome stream we need for Facebook acquisitions. Or we're seeing that people that we've acquired through action as their first step, taking a petition action, those folks are more valuable to us than people who are having come onto the list by a survey, which is a more passive form of first engagement. We should be changing our strategy up to bring more people on by petition if we can do that. Simple indicators like that and looking at the lifetime value of someone really makes a difference in informing what offer and what value proposition and what engagement is the right connection to have with someone at the beginning. So I hope that gave the question about kind of what reports would look good and what makes sense, gave some deeper substance to that. We have other reports that we can share. We can do that separately if you want to follow up with us. We want to be sensitive to your time. And at this point, if there are any other questions, please ask them. We'll give it just a few seconds for something to pop. 3, 2, 1, and that'll be a wrap. We really appreciate you all spending the time with us. We hope that you found this informative. If you have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate. You can email me at Michael, Michael, @Frakture.com. I'm at Twitter at mpservino. And you've got April's contact information from the emails that were sent out. And we very much appreciate the time you spent and wish you all a great rest of the day and good marketing.
All right, thanks everybody. This is Frakture signing off.